Many years ago, I played for a softball team named the Outlaws. Sometime in the 1980s, our shortstop, who was the athletic director for San Quentin Prison, arranged for us to play against the inmates. We were told not to wear blue jeans, so that while we were in the prison, we would be distinguished from the inmates. I remember driving up to San Quentin Village, parking, walking through the gate, and being told by prison security that if we were taken hostage, they would do everything in their power to get us out, but they would not negotiate for our release. This was not very comforting to hear, as you can imagine, but we moved along through the halls to the big field in the center of the prison complex, where many big, strong men were pumping iron. As we got to the softball field, I noticed plenty of inmates on the grounds, but very few guards. There were a few up in the towers overlooking the field, but if there was any trouble on the field, we were going to be out of luck. I did not feel very assured about our physical safety. As I walked around and talked with some of the inmates, I started to feel more comfortable. I realized that the prisoners really enjoyed having outsiders come and play ball. I'm sure it helped ease, if just a little, the monotony of prison life. Our teammate who worked at San Quentin said there had been a lot of talk and betting going on the week before the game, with a lot of trash talking the following week. We were to play 2 games that summer day. Betting evidently was a very important part of this game. I remember being told that 3 of the 4 inmates had money on the inmates. 3 of the 4 umpires had money on the inmates. At a critical play at second base, the one ump who did not bet on the inmates made a crucial call in favor of our team. I'm not sure he had money on us. Maybe he was just an honest ump. But the other 3 ganged up on him, getting him to change his call, which ultimately caused our team to lose the game. The second game was called on account of blood, or so we were told. Sometime during the game, what was thought to be blood was noticed in a cell block, and our team was escorted off the field and into the cafeteria for lunch. The game was canceled, the prison went into lockdown, and we walked out of the prison. We were never told the real story. As I got older, the details of this great experience grow fuzzy in my mind. I remember the apprehension I had playing there, but I also remember enjoying the experience and feeling more secure on the playing field as we talked with the inmates. One told me he had just arrived at San Quentin from Marin County, where the prison is located. I didn't know him, but it struck me that we lived in the same county, but in vastly different worlds. It seemed all the inmates, players, and spectators really enjoyed themselves. This experience is something I will always remember from my 25 years of playing softball. And that's from Joe Riley in Mill Valley, California. There's a chapter in this book called, well, first I really got to find the right page. There's a chapter in this book called The International Baseball, the International Game. And I have stories from or about 14 different countries. Some cases it's how the game is played or followed there. In some cases, it's people from other countries experiencing American baseball. And this is one of those stories. In 1972 or 3, I attended a Winter League game between a team from Santo Domingo, managed by Tommy Lasorda, and the Santiago team managed by former Major Leaguer Ozzie Virgil, who was played at the Aguias Stadium in Santiago, Dominican Republic. As usual, electrical power had been shut off to the poorer section of the city so the ballpark lights could shine brightly. Cattle trucks with attached racks parked behind the outfield fences, and fans paid 5 or 10 cents to hang on and view the game. After the second inning, a merengue band entered, blaring their crowd-pleasing music. El Presidente, arguably the world's finest beer, flowed freely. A unicyclist performed on top of the Aguia dugout. Team rosters consist of at least 50% Dominicans with the balance foreigners, mostly Americans from the minors or aspiring first-year Major League players. The Alus were regular in the league, joined by players such as Tony La Russa, Raleigh Fingers, Gene Kleins, and many other future major leaguers. The umpiring crew consisted of 1 Dominican and 2 American minor league umps. In one of the middle innings of a closely contested game, a Santo Domingo batter hit a ball over the right field fence. The first base umpire, an American, called the ball foul. There was no foul pole on the outfield fence, but there was a yellow line painted on the wall. Lasorda immediately confronted the umpire in a face-to-face debate. The ump didn't relent. Now, if any of you guys have watched Tommy Lasorda in action, none of this should be a surprise. Lasorda threw his cap on the ground and then removed his shoes and threw them down. The fans cheered wildly. At this point, the umpire threw Lasorda out of the game. But Tommy continued. He removed his shirt and his undershirt, unbuckled his belt, and at the same time making a threatening gesture to indicate he might remove his pants. 2 security officers and a policeman rushed onto the field and escorted him to an area under the stadium. Fans were in a frenzy, enjoying every minute of the action. What happened the rest of the evening is unclear. The local newspaper reported that Lasorda was taken to the police station and released later that night. The next day, newspapers reported how this foreigner had insulted the Dominican culture and mores. It was front-page news. The sports sections were less accusatory, but highly critical of this American's actions. The story seemed to fade away rather rapidly. 3 weeks later, the fans chose Lasorda as the manager of the league all-star team. And that's from Don Christians in San Francisco, California. I did not set out to write a scholarly or academic book. That was never the intent. It was never intended to become a vehicle for social issues. But I received the stories I received, and I got 3 that I just thought fit so well together and kind of a bit of a reflection on society. And I'd like to read one of those for you now. In 1970, my older brother, Cottrell, was asked to be a pitcher for an all-white baseball league team. I was 10 years old, and we lived in the small town of Magnolia, Arkansas. When I heard about this invitation, I became both excited and fearful because the leagues in town were segregated. My father called a family meeting to vote about whether this should be a good thing for Cottrell to pursue. The whole family finally agreed that it would be a wonderful opportunity for him, and he began to practice that Monday morning. Once he made it home from the first day of practice, he shared that it had been a great day. He was striking at his teammates and also hitting home runs. I asked if he was treated differently from his teammates, and he said he felt like he was treated like a star. On Saturday, the whole family jumped into the car to see his first game. When we arrived, I felt nervous, unsure if we were even permitted to sit with the white people, but we were welcomed by everybody. It was so exciting to see Cottrell take the mound. The crowd was quiet until the first pitch, strike, and then the second and third, a strikeout. The crowd went crazy. Cottrell allowed no hits, just strikeouts and foul balls throughout the whole game. The most amazing thing is he also hit 2 home runs. That day marked one of the greatest moments for my brother and the whole family. Experience made me realize that it wasn't about the color of his skin, but the magnitude of his skills. I loved my small town. And that's from Kathy Revels, who now lives in Rialto, California. Okay. My wife and I were at a ball game one time. It was a quote unquote exhibition game. It was one of the preseason games that the Giants would play against the A's before the season started. And I won't go into the whole story, but something happened with between a woman in the stands and the ball dude. The ball dudes are the guys that sit along in San Francisco, sit along the field and catch balls and throw them up to the crowds. And it was quite a remarkable scene. And a couple of weeks later, I went down and I spoke to the ball dude who was there at the game I was now at. And I told him about this. And I asked him if he had a story. And he said, well, yes, I do. And this is Gary's story. And I will say that if I tear up a little bit at this or some of the other stories, that's okay with me. I hope you do as well. As a longtime Giants fan, it was a thrill to hear that I would get a chance to be a ball dude. A relative recommended me to those who assigned people to sit down the foul lines and retrieve balls in those areas. You get a crash course in what to do and what not to do, so as not to embarrass yourself or interfere with the game by touching a ball in play. There are a few instructions that come with the honor of being a ball dude, one of which is pretty much a no-brainer. Hand the ball to a kid, don't throw it up in the stands, hand it to a young fan. We all know what would happen if you tried to toss a ball into the stands. Chaos. Having umpired Little League and high school baseball, I felt confident not making a mistake that would put me on the don't invite him back list or an ESPN highlight, but I didn't figure on being touched emotionally. Positioned on the first base side, I used my dad's glove and old three-fingered Wilson from the early 40s. It's always a topic of conversation. I was just proud to have a piece of my dad on the field, and with my son ball duding along third base, it was like having three generations out there. I got a couple of easy grounders and caroms, which I tossed to little guys sitting in or near the front row. Then I looked up around to see if there were any other young fans sitting a little farther up who might be worthy. I found a likely candidate and hoped I'd get another foul ball hit my way. I'd been watching the whole family for a little while, anticipating a chance to surprise them. They appeared to be a grandma, mom, and dad, and a little girl about 4 or 5 years old. The girls all had on identical pink jackets, and they were enthralled with a little girl who was having as exciting a time as I had ever seen a young fan have. She would get so excited every time something would happen, and the crowd would get loud, and she would stand and clap her hands and cheer along with everyone else. She was adorable. I had to get her a ball. Sure enough, it happened. A nice three-hopper hit, well, right into Dad's old faithful glove. I looked back to the stands to locate my young recipient. People were standing, yelling, reaching, begging for the ball. I couldn't see my little fan. I pointed towards the area, about 14 or 15 rows up. Mom and Dad sort of realized I was pointing their way, and in a questioning look, they pointed to the little girl and mouthed, "Her?" I gave a nod and waved her down. They leaned over and sent her on her way. It was obvious she was too excited to describe, but there was one thing I can describe. She had Down syndrome. Her smile and enthusiasm told me that while it may have affected her physically, she was not hindered emotionally. She knew she was going to get a baseball. When she got to me, I placed the ball in her hand and just touched her on the head. Her joy and happiness multiplied. She started to jump up and down and cheer as if she had caught the final out of a big game. She looked at me with the brightest eyes and said, "Yeah, yeah," and ran back to her seat. The whole crowd in the area gave an audible "aw," and many stood to watch and applaud. I couldn't take my eyes off her. When she got back to her seat, she was still as excited as could be. She showed it to Grandma and then Mom, getting big hugs from them. Mom looked at me, and you can see her eyes starting to tear up. She mouthed a very slow and grateful "thank you." By now, Mom and Grandma were wiping away the tears. She showed the ball to Dad, who gave her a hug, turned and looked at me, making a gesture I'll never forget. Pointing me, he formed the words, "You're the man." I reached up and tipped my cap like the players of old would do. In that split second, I had a rush of emotion I still feel today when I talk about it. People were applauding and cheering, and in that moment, I felt like a big league baseball player. I never expected that. I gave a baseball to a little girl and made her and her family feel jubilant and emotional to the point of tears. They thought I had done something extra special for them, for their daughter. But what they did for me can't be measured. To be able to receive praise from hundreds, if not 1,000 or so baseball fans, for a simple and to me obvious act performed on the field, let me feel for a moment like a star. I'll never forget that feeling or that family or what it's like to feel like a big leaguer. And this is from Gary Freilich, Frano, he likes to be called. And Gary and I have become friends, and I tremendously value that friendship. So I want to just take this time to stop for a second and say that I hope you're enjoying the stories. I hope that you are able to donate a little to Jennifer's charity. If you have a story that you would like to send to me, I will be honest and say I'm almost done with book 2, but I'm going to have a lot of stories again left over for book 3. You can send the story to me at Eric, that's ERIC, baseballstories, BASEBALLSTORIES @gmail. If you're interested in the book, I don't want to make this a big promotion thing, but if you're interested in the book, contact me or go on my Facebook page, Bases to Bleachers, or the website, basestobleachers.com. But most of all, I'm encouraging you to donate, if you possibly can, to Jen's charity, to Jen's organization. I'm sorry. Jen, did you want to say something, or should I keep going?
Eric, we want to. Yes, do you want to hear me?
It's a little fractured, but
okay. Yeah, I think I'm coming through on 2, but Thank you for doing this. We want everyone to buy your book because we have so many friends in it. All right, go ahead. I'm going to mute myself. My audio is messed up.
Yeah, there was an echo, but yeah, we'll get that later. Maybe when we're all done with this, you can open it up and people can comment if they'd like.
Can you hear me on this if I talk?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Do it that. So I had two audios running. That's why. So thank you for doing this. We want everyone to be buying Eric's book for sure. We definitely promote Eric. He's a true scholar, and he's got the compassion and heart of a true hero. And all our friends are in this book. So this is a book after our own heart between Ozzie Virgil and Perry Barber and Maybelle Blair. I want to request all those. So thank you, Eric. Go ahead.
This is truly my pleasure. They use the expression like a labor of love. And I hate to be trite, but that's exactly what this was. I mean, I'll tell you all that over the course of 8 years, I collected 1,250 stories. I've now gotten probably another 150 after the book came out. And I'll collect them as long as anybody wants to send them to me. It's a real thrill.
I love it.
Yeah. And also,
You're
I'm
really
just
doing it's an amazing thing to inspire the love of baseball again, especially at this time. It gives us all a bubble and gets us in the fields.
Right. I will also say this is just a kind of a side thing. I love music as much as I love baseball. So if anybody has a great concert story that they want to share with me, you could send that one to me too, because that's the next book I'm working on after I finish the second baseball book. Okay, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with a program called Job Corps. Job Corps is where I spent the last 30 years of my career. It's a job training program for disadvantaged youth. They're taught academic skills and vocational skills and social skills. And there are several stories in the book, a number of stories in the book, and 3 that I'm reading today actually from people who I met through Job Corps. And this is one of them. And I did not know this person very well. He worked at the San Jose Job Corps Center. I'd met him once or twice. And as so often the case, I am just absolutely amazed at the story that he chose to share with me, how deeply personal this was. And here it is. Being a Yankees fan is not as easy as one expects. You would think 27 world championships would make it a little easier, but this only brings attention and hatred to those who wear the pinstripes proudly. The success of the Yankees, the history associated with the legends of Yankee Stadium, continue to be a focal point for any other team's fans to scream, "The Yankees just buy their players in championships." However, I'm not a Yankee fan because of their success. I bleed pinstripes because watching them play reminds me of a time in life where I felt loved, safe, and secure. And all I cared about in life was the pitch count, who was on base, and how many outs were left in the inning. Although I must admit that watching my beloved Yankees win 6 World Series in my short lifetime of 37 years has been pretty awesome to watch. I was born in Yonkers, New York, about 8 miles north of the old Yankee Stadium. My childhood was challenging, as I learned to survive in a dysfunctional home littered with drugs and alcohol. My parents were good parents, but continued to work through their challenges. Living under these dynamics, there was an atmosphere of hostility and a lack of safety for a child. However, I had one escape. When my great-grandfather, Larry, and my uncle would ask me if I wanted to see the Yankees play during the dog days of summer, I was ecstatic to know that the only sounds I was going to hear were those of Yankee baseball. The first sound, always helped set the stage, was the voice of the one and only Mr. Bob Shepard, the longtime Yankees announcer. When he would recite the lineups for the game, I knew I had nothing to worry about. During those moments, I felt at peace. As we watched the games, Larry shared stories of all the former Yankees he watched as a kid. He too was born in Yonkers in 1904 and started going to the games during the Babe Ruth days. He was a book of knowledge and could tell you stories of games he attended between the 20s and 50s, talking about all the greats, including Gehrig, DiMaggio, Berra, Mantle, and Ford. Larry believed in keeping score and ensured I knew how to do as well. We would work together during the game, and he would make sure I was scoring the game properly. As I watch the Yankees play today as an adult, I am able to escape from all the daily responsibilities that we all endure: work, personal, and family life demands. I am able to disappear into the innings of a game and take the time to soak in the sounds and follow my team throughout the spring, summer, and hopefully October baseball. Watching my Yankees reminds you of the time I was able to spend with Larry, and I thank him for giving me these experiences and helping me feel like a child who shouldn't have to worry about adult things associated with a dysfunctional home. I am reminded that life is like baseball. We all have free strikes against us. We all get out from time to time, but the important thing is to get up and swing the bat the next time you're at the plate. Play ball, and let's go Yankees. Yankees are not my team, although they were when I was a kid in New York and Mickey Mantle was my hero. But my baseball lineage is a long and sordid one, so we'll discuss that another time. As a regular traveler, I spent a lot of time in the Delta Sky Club. During a morning hangout, I sat next to a middle-aged gentleman with a young son, and we sparked up a conversation that lasted extra long since our flights were both delayed. Our talk was often interrupted by people saying hello to him. I assumed he was a popular Salt Lake City businessman. One interruption ended with him signing an autograph, so I decided to ask him what line of work he was in. He responded by saying, the sports industry. We continued to talk about kids, politics, the weather, etc. After a dozen or so more interruptions, I finally just said, who the heck are you? I hung out with Johnny Bench for 2 hours and never got his autograph. I got benched at the Sky Club. And that's from my friend John Peters in Salt Lake City. We've all heard the expression that baseball is life, right? And with it come the happy and the sad. And there are some sad stories in here. There are happy stories that make you cry, like the guy who caught the foul ball and gave it to the girl with Down syndrome. And then there's just some stories that are just sad. And I don't like to shy away from that element because, baseball is life. This is a story I got from a guy who I met one time at a Job Corps center. He was Native American. I came to learn that baseball was terribly important to the Native American community. And he gave me this story. Now, this is from my chapter called Doubles. And there is the other story that's with this actually has a happier ending. But I just wanted to read this story for you. The game that means the most to me would have to be Seattle Mariners versus Oakland Athletics on September 6th, 2009. There wasn't much to the game, but I remember the long conversations with Joe about guns, girls, baseball, and his future as a father someday. Between pitches, we would keep score, and I even let him have a drink of my beer. He acted like it was gross and hated it, but I knew he was putting me on. The Mariners lost 3-2, but it was the last father and son time we had before he joined the Marine Corps. I guess in a way, baseball is a time where fathers and sons can share memory and experience to last a lifetime, regardless of who has to carry on the story. This game is very special to me because it's the last game I ever saw with my son, Joe, who was killed in action in Sangin, Afghanistan on Easter Sunday, 2011. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a little story that means a lot to me and share my experiences, strength, and hope through baseball. Now, I've had a lot of people say to me, thank you for giving me the chance to tell the story. And I always delete it from the story because it's not important. It doesn't matter. But I left that in there because I wanted to be able to say in a little editor's note, I met Sean. We talked about our jobs in baseball. And every time someone thanks me for giving them the opportunity to tell their story, I delete it. But this time I wanted to leave it in Sean's hands. I wanted to leave in Sean's thanks so that I could reply, thank you, Sean, for letting me tell the story to the world. All right. I try to keep these stories, I try not to focus on my own personal stories, but I'm going to actually read one of mine, but I also wanted to, I may read one of mine, but I also want to read one from my nephew. One minute I was a 5-year-old Dodgers fan, cheering my dad's favorite team, the Men in Blue. The next, I was a Giants fan. My mom, dad, sister, and I were at my grandmother's house celebrating a family holiday, along with my aunt and uncle and cousins, who decided that it was time as a San Francisco that I become a Giants fan, their team. Having a young and malleable mind, my extended family, Lynn and Eric, Rachel and David, saw the perfect opportunity to convert me. Not much was required for this conversion to take place. They told me a couple of times, Giants rule, Dodgers suck. They gave me t-shirts and hats, and that was good enough for me. I've been a diehard Giant fan ever since, and I have never looked back. Years later, my friends and I arrived at AT&T Park one night with one goal in mind. We were going to piss off the opposing team's bat boy. Why? Because we could. We were high school boys, and why not? Our seats were in prime bat boy heckling position, 2 rows up between the visiting team's dugout and home plate. We spotted our target as soon as we got to our seats. He was similar in age to us, but he walked around with a little swagger we did not find befitting for him, further fueling our efforts. Between the first and last pitches of the game, every time he emerged from the dugout, we acknowledged his presence. Our constant heckling was neither clever nor funny. The key is that it was constant. Hey, bat boy, run faster. There he is. My favorite was a simple standing ovation by the 4 of us, showing our approval for the job our friend on the field was doing. Around the 6th inning, we got exactly what we'd been waiting for, the illustrious middle finger. Mr. Bat Boy was headed for one of his many trips to the on-deck circle, and he'd had enough of our heckling, so he turned around and he erected his middle finger at us. We rejoiced as if the Giants had just won the World Series, which they did soon after many times. The fans around us were greatly amused and applauded our hard work. Whether he was fired for his response, we of course don't know, but for us, it will go down as one of the great moments in baseball history. And I will completely disavow any responsibility for my family, particularly my wife, Lynn. You hear, Lynn? She's here, telling Josh, how could you like the Dodgers? The Dodgers killed Bambi's mother. That was Lynn. That wasn't me. Very cold. All right, I'm going to read one of my stories for this book. I've never read this one out loud, but I know Perry certainly will enjoy listening to this one. In 2010, the San Francisco Giants went to the World Series versus the Texas Rangers. In addition to our 2 regular tickets for Game 2 as part of our season ticket partnership, I was able to score a pair for the series opener. I told my wife, Lynn, that I really wanted to go to the game with our daughter, Rachel, who works for the team in guest services, and Lynn completely understood. The game started with both teams scoring runs in the early innings. But in the 5th, the Giants stormed ahead with 6 runs on the way to a romp. The energy in the stands was electric as ecstatic fans watched them get hit after hit, run after run. Everyone is yelling and screaming, smiling and giving high fives to everyone seated or standing within reach. Rachel and I were hugging and cheering along with everyone else, with the activity on the field simply providing an opportunity to share many moments of extreme joy and affinity with my daughter. Rachel and I have had our share of difficulties over the years, with lots of evidence that differences and annoyances can sometimes overshadow the love between family members. I won't say that game changed our relationship around completely and forever, but the experience we shared that night did have a big effect on how we felt about being together for a little while, and a smaller but lasting effect on how we did together for a long time afterwards. The next game with Lynn, in which the Giants were in command from the beginning, was also great, and we were all overjoyed that the Giants swept the Rangers. But that game 1, I'll never forget how I felt that night. It was spectacular. And for those of you who are interested, there's a picture of Rachel and I at that game. This is from the chapter called Love and Baseball. In many of my chapters, the theme is clear, although what I often do is I throw in little anomalies to it. This is not an anomaly to this chapter. This fits in perfectly well. I met these folks when we were at a Giants game. They were visiting from Pittsburgh, and we met them in a little restaurant before the game. I'd been dating my then girlfriend, Ashley, for about 6 years. Always afraid of commitment, I often told her, we'll get married when the Pirates make the playoffs. I figured that would buy me a couple of decades. But on October 1st, 2013, I was sitting high up in the stands behind home plate with Ashley for the wild card game. When they announced the lineups and Andrew McCutcheon ran into the field, PNC erupted to a level I have never heard before or since. I looked at Ashley, and I'm not afraid to admit that I cried. A 28-year-old crying at a baseball game out of pure joy. I had suffered through decades of losing, following every game, never thinking a moment like this would ever happen. As great a story as it would have been, I did not propose at that game, even though I already had gotten a ring. It was inevitable, and I officially proposed a few weeks later on October 26th. There is no doubt, however, that that pennant race in the final months of the season brought us closer together. We didn't worry about making plans in the evenings. We knew we would either be going to a game or watching it on television. Ashley went from not being sure how many players were on the field at a time to knowing the meaning of loogie. Loogie is a left-handed one-out guy. And she learned the 6-4-3, short to second to first double play. Baseball was such an important part of my life, and I recognized the point where she adopted its importance and brought it into its greatness. We were married a year later and still both agree that the 2013 wildcard game was the best moment of our lives. I mean, honestly, how many women could say a National League wildcard game in the nosebleeds was better than their wedding day? And that's from Joe Giardina in Pittsburgh. And I was really honored that when we were in Cleveland last year and doing a reading, that Joe and Ashley traveled from Pittsburgh just to come and see us again at that reading. How are we doing for time?
We love that. I was just going to do that, like mine. It's at 2:52. We're absolutely loving this. And we would love if we could do the encore Perry story, because I distracted her last time. But you are doing so great. Read whatever you love.
Well, there's one more.
8 minutes,
how about if I read the story I want to read? I'll read Perry's story. I'll read my story and then a really short one. So we're talking about 12 or 13 minutes. Is that okay?
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. We're so enjoying this.
Well, I'm glad, and as am I. All right. Well, Perry, I know exactly what your story is. This is from the chapter called Women in Baseball. And what I want to say is, I'm a pretty friendly guy, and I've got a lot of friends, and I work at it. But the one thing I never, ever, ever expected from this book was the number of friends that I was going to make. And I don't use the word friends lightly. I don't mean, the 200 or 300 people on Facebook that are my friends that I honestly don't even know who they are. I'm talking about friends that I've gotten to meet. Jennifer, I think that we're getting close to that, you and I. And Perry, I know that we're there. And this is a tremendous honor for me. So here's Perry's story. Back in 1990, I was assigning umpires to camps down in Florida. And at the request of another umpire I knew, I hired a former American League umpire named Frank Umont to work the Mets fantasy camp with me. I hadn't met Frank, but I had a copy of an old baseball magazine with an article about, of all things, a home run call at Yankee Stadium that he had allegedly blown. So the first time I introduced myself, he was sitting in the locker room at Port St. Lucie with the other umpires, and I walked up to him. He looked at me totally flabbergasted. I guess that Joe, the umpire who'd asked me to hire Frank, hadn't told him that Perry was a woman, much less a petite blonde, who in her street clothes at least looked like butter would melt in her mouth. Right away, I could tell he was the sort of put off, and I figured, what the hell? I can't get much worse. So I pulled out my copy of Baseball Magazine and I showed him the article, and I cheekily asked, do you remember that play? Did you really blow that call? Umont sat there, in his underwear, by the way, thighs the size of ham hocks, his face ruddy with the hue of way too many alcoholic beverages. 70 years old if he was a day, his 20-year career in the American League a distant memory. He stared me up and down, looking as if he was about to swallow me whole and spit me back out in pieces. This enormous smile creased his face, and in a voice reminiscent of Eugene Paulette's, he growled, "Baby, I blew a lot of calls out there." It was hilarious. He autographed the article for me. I probably still have that issue somewhere in my basement. I'll have to go rummaging one of these days. That's from Perry Barber, and here's the photo of Perry as an umpire.
That just made my whole last 3 months. For those of you who don't know, I've been quarantined with umpire Perry Barber, and she is every bit the legend and more. Thank you, Eric.
My pleasure. Okay, so I'm going to read 2 more stories now. Like your children, you never want to say what your favorite child is. I don't have a favorite child. I'm going to have two favorite children. And I don't want to say what the best baseball story in this book is, because honestly, there are a lot of bests. But if there was a competition for what the best one is, this would be in the running. And this is a guy, and I've only read this in public once because it's long, but it's unbelievable. And this is a guy who I met on a Facebook group, and he wrote me the story, and he literally had no idea how great it was. And every time I tell him how great the story is, he just doesn't quite get it. So I'll let you decide for yourselves. I have so many favorite baseball stories befitting someone whose favorite thing is baseball. The game and its inherent epiphanic highs and lows is a roadmap of my emotional history. I fell in love with it as an 11-year-old kid in Baltimore in 1975, and have grown into a man who lives and dies by what my beloved Orioles do each and every game for 6 months a year, forever accompanied by my 1968 Angry Bird tattoo. My early years following were filled with disappointment, which taught me the true meaning of baseball as a game designed to break your heart. Among my many cherished memories framed by the game, one stands out in its relatively low level of emotion, but steeped in the magic that can only occur in one of the 30 cathedrals of this true religion. All I ever wanted to be when I was a kid was a baseball player or rock star. It never occurred to me to be both. And as neither actually came to pass, that's fine. I did come closer to one than the other. It was a much lower goal and thus much less precious. I became a singer, guitarist, and benign despot of a band, which in the mid-90s had a record deal and the perks that came with it. I, of course, spent those markers on free baseball tickets from major label and associated law firm season ticket plans. That the tickets were of Dodger games and not Orioles wasn't an issue, as I lived in Los Angeles, and any chance to go to any baseball game was magic then. It actually still is. By the late 90s, my band Lifter had run the course of releasing and touring for our first record. It certainly didn't make me a star, but I am proud of the damn beautiful concept of an album about her and the heartbreak she ultimately wrought on me. Our deal with Interscope Records was tenuous at best, and we wrote and recorded demos for a second record, which never came into existence. But we still had access to those baseball tickets. The label had put us in the hands of a producer named Bob Marlett, a great guy with a fair amount of credits, but a metal and hair guy, not a good fit for my kind of songs. He was our connection to a possible second record and those important Dodger tickets. By our, I'm including our drummer, Tony, a diehard Mets fan. One day, recording songs in Bob's home studio, his friend, John Five, stopped by. It turned out that this little rocker fellow was a guitarist for Marilyn Manson. This was not particularly my favorite band, but it was still pretty cool, and he was a nice enough guy. What I remember most about meeting John Five, and apropos of nothing, is his keeping his crazily overstuffed wallet jammed in his front pocket, looking like a tumor on his thigh. So there we were, Tony and I, and two decidedly heavily costumed and adorned metal guys. We had 4 lower level field tickets to a Dodgers game for the next day, and it occurred to me to ask Bob and John if they wanted to go with us. Bob said sure, but John's reaction killed me. He literally lit up like some Christmas morning 8-year-old, eyes widened and mouth agape, and he said, "Hell yes, I want to go." He told us he had never been to a baseball game, which seemed crazy to me that just on the face of it. How can any late 20s American male have escaped even a single trip to a baseball game? But his excitement was so visceral, you had to believe him. Next day, we met at my place and headed to Dodger Stadium. Tony and I were simply transfixed by the level of excitement exuded by John Five. It was a perfect Los Angeles night, and we had great seats, and life was exactly as it should be. Then came the moment, the little baseball memory that initially got me involved with this project, this book. I have a lot of great baseball memories, foul balls caught and the one I didn't catch, but this little story is about the pure stunned amazement of a guy decked out in black heavy metal gear, attending his first Major League Baseball game, and the little stunt I pulled to put him over the top. We arrived early enough to see the Dodgers take batting practice, a must for me, and especially for John 5. The four of us were standing behind our seats on the foul side of the left field pole. Clearly, it was up to Tony and me to gloriously guide John through the seminal moment in his life. I needed him to understand the emotional history and romance the game held for me. He needed to understand the heartbreak and the beauty and the bittersweet sadness of the retired numbers on the outfield fences. He needed to understand that 32 was the wholly iconic number worn by the left arm of God, Sandy Koufax, and he needed to witness the little moments of the magic of baseball. I pointed out different relics of my religion housed in the secret cathedral, and then decided to screw with him a little bit. By now, he was fully prepped. Taking it all in the way you hope for anytime you take someone to their first real baseball game, this heavily metalled outfit made his childlike awe even more beatific to behold. I mean, this guy was just amazed in the purest sense and brought none of the faux coolness one would expect from a member of such a wildly different tribe. Excuse me. I turned to John and told him to wait while I grabbed the ball, as if it was the most mundane thing possible. How are you going to do that? He asked, looking like a little kid, save his Slayer t-shirt and that inane wallet on his thigh. With no idea how to actually end this joke, I said, I'm just going to walk into the seats and grab a foul batting practice ball. I made a big show of inspecting the row of still empty seats, ascertaining exactly where to stand to get the next ball. Ah, right there I should do it, I said, casually walking into a row of left field foul seats. Tony was just watching and humoring me as he took in the incredulous wonder of John's face, not wanting to miss any of this. I got to my chosen spot. And of course, baseball being the magical game that it is, the very next ball bounced 20 feet in front of the wall, a ground rule double in a game, and then perfectly, magically, epically into my hands. The true religious aspect of the moment is that I was divinely granted a moment, excuse me for what's about to come, but it's what is in the book. I was divinely granted a moment of inner strength that allowed me, instead of giving into the sudden flood of adrenaline and literally shitting myself, to simply turn to the guys and say in a soft, almost lazy voice, okay, I got one. Let's check out our seats. To which John, transfixed like he'd seen God, bellowed, get me one! I told him I was sorry, but it only worked for one ball a game. He was crestfallen, still riding on the rush of a glimpse of the beautiful and knowable. Tony whispered to me, how in the hell did you do that? I was literally shaking as I told him to just keep cool, and we walked toward our seats. We watched the game with our newly converted baseball fans, explaining the rules and traditions of the sport as the game unfolded. The chance to share this beautiful alchemical mix of magic, exaltation, heartbreak, and epiphanic punishment and reward with someone utterly new and open to its experience is truly a rare gift to those of us already shackled by its soul-wrenching power. To be able to give away what makes this game so intensely romantic and perfect is exactly, ultimately, why we keep coming back. It's a transformative experience, the opportunity to guide a new soul through the open gates of being consumed by a love of the game. We can feel the wonder of our first game, maybe with our dads, maybe someone else, anyone acting as a shepherd of the magic of baseball. For that night, I was the 8 or 9-year-old little boy who sat and watched an early 1970s Oriole game from the cheap seats up above the first base line. And I was the kid who, before life would ultimately lead me away from and finally back to the game I loved, before all the rock music and drugs and darkness set in, I was just a kid filled with wonder about what was unfolding on that beautiful green field so far below me. What happened on the field and who won the game is of little importance. What mattered was sharing the night with a guy who simply shouldn't have been there with me. I gave John the ball and silently hoped he'd been infected by the baseball fans' affliction. We stayed until the end, not the norm at a Dodgers game, and headed back into a world of unlistened to demos and the slow dissolution of a band. But still a world where the game of baseball makes even the worst days livable. And whether or not John 5 ever watched another baseball game in his life, I know I got a chance to share magic with him in the form of a ridiculously lucky caught foul ball. And I got to feel like a little boy again. And that's from Mike Coulter in Los Angeles, California. And this is the point I always do this, where I say, if this is a live audience, you will undoubtedly would give me a standing ovation and start screaming, more, encore, encore. You don't have to do that, because I know exactly what my last story is going to be. And this is it.
We're just
What? And this is from a really close friend of mine, someone I went to college with. I've been to a couple of games that have been particularly interesting for me. I recall attending a game in which Jim Bouton was the starting pitcher in his rookie season. I took my son Jeremy to the first night game ever played at Camden Yards in Baltimore, the second game of the season. However, the most significant game for me was during the 1986 World Series. I am not a diehard Mets fan, as the Yankees are my team, but I certainly prefer them to the Red Sox. It was my first ever visit to Fenway Park, and it was great to see leadoff batter Mookie Wilson blast Dennis Oil Can Boyd's off-speed pitch into the right field seats leading off game number 3. I cheered wildly and had a beer thrown in my face by the typical Red Sox fans seated behind me. It tasted great. And that's from Barry Glovich in Baltimore. And that's my stories.
We love that so much. Is Maybelle Blair's story a brief one as well? Because
It's
our last recording.
I could read it. It's not overly long.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I know we're past our time, but you know, these legends, it's amazing to be friends with them, and what an honor. Eric, gosh, we love how your voice inflection, you really get us in the feels with these.
Good, thank you. And it's quite okay with me if we're running over time, as long as it's okay with everybody else. So many
Thank you. It's okay with me, and we want to want to thank Breck Smith for actually running the background for this on a Sunday. We got professional production for this, so thank you, Breck, for donating time on a Sunday. And back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Breck. Yeah, and again, thanks to all of you who are there. And the book is Bases to Bleachers. Send me a story if you want. Let me know if you want to get a copy of it. So all of you know that the movie League of Their Own was based on a real league. And the thought that I was going to get a story from a woman who actually played in that league never crossed my mind. And I am so honored to have gotten this story by Maybelle Blair. In October 1947, I was playing softball in Los Angeles. A scout, whose name I don't recall, saw me and said, "I want you to play pro ball." I replied, "Of course, there is no such thing." And he responded with, "I have news for you, there is." I tried to explain that my mom wouldn't let me go, but he wanted to meet my folks. When he told Mom I would be paid $50 a week, Mom turned to Dad and said, "Go crank up the car." Off I went to play for the Peoria Red Wings in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. 70 years later, I vividly recall how I felt the first time I put on that cute team uniform. I felt so proud. I put on my spikes and walked up the ramp to the accompanying sound of the clicking of the spikes on the concrete and saw all the greenery on the field. It was a thrill I felt and still remember all the way through my body. I remember little things from my time on the team. I had a Cuban roommate who did not speak any English. It was hard to communicate, of course, but we got along fine. The bus rides to different stadiums were always fun. We always had to wear dresses and lipstick or else we'd be fined. We learned how to play poker. When one of our teammates broke her leg sliding into second base, she was taken to Catholic Hospital, which had very sharp restrictions on visiting hours. We had to climb up a fire escape just to visit her, breaking the visitor's curfew. The one game experience I most clearly recall involved the first time I came in to pitch. There was a runner on first, and I was so nervous, so excited, so in awe of the moment that as I took my windup, I forgot to check the runner. By the time my first pitch reached home plate, the runner was at third base. I did not make that mistake again. I played one season, 1948, and made wonderful friendships, some of which have lasted to this day. We made history, but we didn't realize it at the time. We were being paid for something we loved to do. I don't know if a woman will ever play in the major leagues, but over 100,000 women in bed are now playing baseball. Try that one again. Over 100,000 women and girls are now playing baseball. Baseball. And they sure need a league of their own. And that's from Maybelle Blair. And in the course of doing this book, I came to realize that women who want to play baseball, they want to play baseball, and they differentiate between baseball and softball. They don't denigrate softball, but if they want to play baseball, baseball is what they want to play. For purposes of the book,
Yes.
I combined the two, but in my mind, it is very clear that women baseball players are baseball players.
Thank you. Baseball for all. Thank you. Guys, this has just been incredible, Eric. The way you read, it's so captivating. And to get a bubble, to enjoy baseball and feel the love of baseball. What is Perry holding up to the camera? We've got a bunch of signed balls behind her. But we can't thank you enough. You're a real hero to so many.
My pleasure. Did anybody have any questions or comments that they wanted to make?
I do believe they have everybody muted because of what happened last time. We have a very controlled environment. So there's been a chat.
Can you hear me?
Chat.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
We can hear Perry. Okay, Perry, you have the floor.
I do have a question here. Is there a deadline for stories that you're collecting for your next two books, the follow-up to this one and the one about music? What is your deadline?
The music, there's really no deadline. The baseball book, it would have to be a pretty phenomenal story to fit its way in. I've got one of yours in the book. There's one of you in the book.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was thinking for other people who might want to contribute.
No, but I can already.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I can already see that there's going to be enough, that there will be a third book. I mean, I've just gotten, so no, there will be no deadline.
So you already have enough? Okay. So you've already got enough for your second book.
I don't have enough for a third book. I've got enough for a second book, but I know that I will ultimately have enough for a third book. Is that a better answer?
Okay.
Clearer?
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
I got you. And the music book, you said there.
The music book.
Yeah, because I have a.
Good.
I know some people that could send you some pretty interesting stories.
Great. Yeah, I'm a little past the dipping my toe into the pool on that one, but I'm not anywhere close to finished with that one.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Good.
And everyone else who has joined us is unmuted. I saw that, so I don't know if anybody else can chime in if they have any questions for Eric C. Gray, our beloved author. I think it's just us that can talk probably. We do have a really controlled environment for good reason. This is our second round. So unless anyone wants to shout and we can hear them,
well,
I guess we'll end it. Okay.
Jennifer,
so Eric, go ahead.
Let me just say that if anybody has a question or if they want to send me a story or if they want to make a comment, I mean, I'm on Facebook. I have a personal page. There's a Basis to Bleachers page, which they can find. And certainly I welcome anybody who would want to be in touch with me.
Exactly.
Okay,
and I've got my picture here. This is it's green. Look at that. It disappears. Okay. Now you can see the Buddha behind me. So, so the book is Basis to Bleachers. Eric C. Gray is the author. And we are so grateful. And the effusive thanks have been rolling today and we can't help it. They're all genuine. We can't thank you enough. And we can't thank everyone enough. If I may take one moment to say, we are actively uniting the entire baseball brotherhood and baseball family like never before. We need everyone to get on board and get in our lane with the APBPA. We've been around since 1924, far before anyone else was on the scene to assist everyone. We assist everybody, ball players, umpires, scouts, trainers, coaches, clubhouse personnel. There are 30,000 individuals who need assistance at this time. We're fully open book. Every penny is trackable, and we actually encourage anybody to request our records and see how little overhead we have. We all do more for free here. It's really the compassion and integrity in baseball. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this, supporting the APBPA. Together, we'll make it another 100 years. We're 4 years from our 100th anniversary. So thank you again, everybody who keeps this going for us.
Thanks, Eric.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Eric.
My pleasure.
All right. So, all right. Go enjoy your Sundays, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.